I am an optimistic economist, and I think there is life after death. There has to be, please. But we have certainly got a lot of challenges ahead. I'm going to cover just 4 or 5 key areas very, very briefly to try and put a context and bring you up to date on, well, what we think is happening in the world economy today. And I just picked up some more figures today, and we've altered 1 or 2 numbers. There are some economies doing very well. Very well indeed, and I won't mention those just yet. Some are doing very badly. Of course, the UK is one of those, unfortunately. But I want to start with a background. Very briefly, just 3 slides. How did we get to this point? And you've heard some of those reasons already, and therefore I won't duplicate that. But I'll emphasize some of the points. How did we get here? And what's the outlook? Where are we now? Where are we going? And I'm not going to give long-term forecasts. I think it's just too risky. We're really looking at this on a month-by-month basis. Next year itself is looking okay, nothing to celebrate. The year after that is looking a little bit better, but nothing to celebrate for many countries. I think beyond that, all bets are off. The biggest fear at the moment today in the world, in the Western world, is the fear of the so-called double dip. But the recovery we're seeing in the Western economies is not that surprising. When you've had falls as we've seen, and you've had hundreds of billions of dollars pumped into economies, if they don't recover with that amount of money, then all bets are off. So we are going to see something of a recovery. But at some point, those stimuli are going to be reversed as governments seek to raise tax again. And the question is, can recovery be sustained? There's a fear of the infamous double dip. Some are even calling it the sawtooth economy. Up and down for a long time. But not necessarily a solid trend. We'll come back to it. So I'm going to talk about the world economy in general. Just 1 slide, because we've got a limited time tonight. The US economy, only 1 slide. That's probably too much, actually, but nevertheless. I won't talk about the UK. How's that? Okay? Fair. European Union in general. Again, yeah, some good news, but nothing to celebrate at the moment. But the emerging markets is the exception. And even the latest figures today, which I'll hold back, concerning Russia, are really looking surprisingly good. Well, maybe not surprising. Refreshingly good news for celebration. I just want to be very brief on what are some of the challenges we're going to face in the coming 1, 2, 3 years? But really, and beyond that as well, because remember, the amount of wealth that has been destroyed, at least on paper, that isn't just paper wealth. If somebody is retiring in the next few months, they will know what it feels like to have their asset value destroyed. It's not just paper for those people. In Japan, which is an example that Stuart gave, you know, in '89, the Nikkei index peaked at just under 39,000 points. Just under 39,000. Imagine that's your pension fund. And at the lowest point of the stock market for Japan, it went down to about 6,500 points. It's still only about 10, 11, 12,000 points today. Imagine your pension fund is currently worth 25% of its value 20 years ago. And you're about to retire. Serious problem. Hence, Japan has the highest suicide rate in the Western world. I'm sure you'll have some questions, I hope, along the way. I'll make sure you have some questions. All right. Okay, just to start, what has been, from an economist viewpoint, interesting and exciting and you know, great to talk about it, is a new language. Well, I say new language. There's actually a lot of old words that have popped back up again in the economics dictionary. Words that I never thought we would ever be discussing in the 21st century. And some new words as well. Let's just remind you some of these words. Look at the word subprime mortgages, as Stuart discovered, that $18,000 property that was mortgaged for $103,000. You know, when I read the word subprime mortgage, I'm thinking somebody is borrowing below prime rate, aren't they? It's the exact opposite, of course. It's people who shouldn't be allowed to borrow. Hence, subprime mortgages. A new language, words we didn't use before. Credit crunch. In Britain, we call it a chocolate bar. You know, it's a crunchy bar. And we now know what it means of course, what it means is the exact opposite to what Stuart showed you. He showed you the credit explosion. This is the credit implosion. But it's more serious than that. It isn't just that we don't want to borrow, it's that banks don't want to lend. That's the implosion. And before I go any further, any bankers here? Come on, there must be a few. I've got the rope and the lazoo here, get the tree, we're going to string them up. Some of them. Nothing personal, it's only business. It's business, this is business. This is not personal. But it's serious. Two words you should Google tonight. Global imbalances is the buzz phrase at the moment. If you Google those two words, they are not new. As early as 1991, there were warnings being issued about the scale of global imbalances, and that is referring to the fact that the US was running a growing current account deficit with the world, financed by the surplus countries lending money, the global imbalance. And then we come to the first law of banking. Remember the first law of banking. If you borrow, borrow big. Because if I owe you $1,000, you'll sue me. If I owe you $1 trillion, I'm not in trouble, you're in trouble. So you're going to borrow, borrow big. And that's what's happened. That imbalance has blown apart. And here's an old-fashioned phrase. I never thought I'd be discussing this. As I said, in the 21st century, John Maynard Keynes coined the phrase paradox of thrift to explain the Great Depression. The mystery of savings. And if you come on this program, we'll tell you more about that. But what it means is, if people stop spending, if people start saving, the economy goes into decline. We need people to spend. The consumer is king. We need all of us to spend. At the moment, in the last 2 years, that has been a big reverse in the world economy. The paradox of thrift, the mystery of savings. Now, I never thought we would ever talk in my lifetime about zero interest rates, although they had it in Japan. But we said, well, that's just Japan. That's their problem. You know, it will never happen here. And in recent years, we've now seen interest rates more or less zero. Not exactly zero, but more or less zero. They've got to have some margin for administrative charges, by the way. In the UK, they're 0.25%. They're 0.5%. I'm being silly because I'm just thinking of myself. I was so lucky. 2 years ago, I took out a tracker mortgage. My monthly repayments until a year ago, listen for this now, on my very big mortgage, my monthly payments were £1,370 every month. And that's okay, that was normal. Today, it's the last month of the 2-year tracker, by the way. They've been £39.61 for the last 12 months. I'm about to remortgage literally on December the 1st. And it's going to be £401. £1,370. So, in a sense, I'm happy, but I'm not happy because the property has fallen by probably 25%. But whoever thought we would be talking about zero interest rates as they had in Japan? And I'm glad Stuart used the phrase lost decade, lost 2 decades. There's a real crisis for many economies. They're going to have a lost decade, a decade of growth that will not materialize. And all of the benefits that growth will create in terms of tax revenue and living standards. Deflation, never thought we'd talk about deflation. 1930s concept, the Great Depression, prices collapsing. And yet we kept forgetting Japan in the 1990s, as Stuart said. And here we have now, in most countries around the world, well, if not minus inflation, at least almost zero inflation. The lack of inflation is, in a sense, deflation. In that context, if prices are not rising, or if prices are falling, you should all be negotiating a wage cut. So go tomorrow and say to your employer, I'd like a wage cut, please. We have deflation.